Hello, welcome back to Getting Your Ducks in a Row. Today I'm joined by Chris Matthews, Associate Director at Atelier One. Chris and his team have worked on some seriously impressive projects, but what's really fascinating is the way they approach every brief, balancing precision engineering with creative thinking and constantly exploring how materials and design can evolve together. In this episode, we get into how global partnerships work, why early collaboration is key, and how problem solving can inform the design of large-scale projects. We also dive into a material you might not expect, bamboo. Chris shares how Atelier One is helping introduce bamboo to UK construction and why this humble plant might hold the key to a more sustainable future. If you're in architecture, engineering, or just passionate about innovation in the built environment, this one's for you. Enjoy.
Chris, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
What excites you most about working at that intersection where creativity meets structural problem solving?
It's fascinating. I think different disciplines can feed off each other, but at the heart of it, it's the same principles, just at different scales and different applications. So if you look at how a sculpture works, for example, you're looking at beams, you're looking at the surface geometry. Those same principles can be applied to a building. It's just sometimes we're looking at something that's half a meter across, sometimes we're looking at something that's 200 meters across. I think what's lovely is that with the art projects, there is this real attention to detail and this real opportunity to explore kind of new materials, how to use them, how to get the detailing super precise. And you don't often get that in buildings so much, but you can use the learnings from the art to help with the buildings and the learning from the buildings to help with the art. So although it seems like they're two completely separate fields, you'd be amazed how much in common there is between the two.
One of the things that fascinates me about sort of, structural engineering and the size of the projects that you guys work on is the sheer scale and of accuracy is paramount, right? And balancing that and delivering something that is beautiful as a structure as well with such a careful balance. But how do you go about managing projects that are so big?
Yeah, I think we're lucky in that there's a kind of clear process. So when you're working with a design team, you've got the RIBA work stages, the kind of concept, scheme, technical design. And what that allows you to do is have a framework that the whole design team is working to make sure that the right decisions are made at the right time. So in the concept phase, a lot of projects can be kind of won or lost right at that early stage. So it's, well, particularly at Atelier One, we're really keen on getting properly involved in the concept phase and making sure that what is being built is a good idea, it's the right arrangement, it's the right materials, the strategy is right. And then when it comes to the actual production side, I think you've just got to have a large team that you can rely on. You've got to make sure that you've got the checklist in place. You design out all of the bits that need to be detailed, and you've just got to be methodical and thorough, basically. There's no particular trick to it. It's just making sure that you work through everything in the right order.
See that? I mean, the process, and I suppose it's the same for anything you're doing, really. Having a structure that you can follow and almost systemizing your work so that people coming into the project are able to understand where you're at is the key to delivering anything, but especially the type of work that you guys do.
Entirely. It's right at the beginning, working out a plan, working out what needs to be done in what order, making sure that everybody else is clear about that, making sure that you communicate well with the rest of the design team, and then having that kind of series of checklists to make sure that everything is complete and documented as well, making sure that all of your assumptions are clear and that you're not going back on something kind of 6 weeks later and not understanding what you've done. So making sure that there is a kind of clear, auditable set of calculations.
And what would it, I appreciate this will depend on the size of the project entirely, but if we look at, and I want to come on to this later on, but the Chadstone Shopping Centre in Melbourne, if we just use that as an example, what does a team from your end look like? What sort of, specialisms do you have?
We were slightly unusual on this one. So there are some practices that are kind of entirely structural. There are some architects that or there are some practices that have kind of more of a design focus, and we're definitely more of a design focus. So we actually have architects in house. So for the Chadstone Shopping Centre, we had 4 of us working on it. So 2 of us were working on the geometry, the form finding side, and then 2 people were working on the structural analysis side. And what was great about that was that you could almost kind of shout upstairs, does this look good? And we had so many different versions of that roof being analysed at once, that there was this real kind of iterative kind of process within the office. But then I think what's critical about our projects is that we are quite a small team. So the office is about 20 people, and there will be directorial oversight on every project, so they know exactly what's going on. And I think that's why we're able to maintain the quality and also work on these kind of interesting, unusual projects. That it's that kind of knowing who you're going to get as part of the team, and making sure that that everybody's aware of what's going on. But I think Chadstone was a perfect example of how actually having that kind of design experience within the office really helps. It meant that we could be doing both the kind of geometric optimization and the structural engineering, and kind of iterating really quickly between the two.
And this may be I'm not sure whether you will agree with this or not, but I would say it's fairly unusual for a firm such as Atelier One that essentially specializes in structural engineering to have a fully fledged architect team as well. Do you find? I mean, in my experience of working with businesses in the industry, you'll have a structural engineer. They will have a partnership with an architectural firm, and they sort of work together, but they're not necessarily under the same roof. Do you find that? I mean, is that something that you think is one of your USPs, or do you see it as quite common amongst your competitors?
So there are practices that do combine architecture and engineering. We're not quite that. So we have designers in our team who can look at the geometry, but we definitely don't have a fully fledged architectural team. We're still primarily structural engineering, but we realize the need to think about both disciplines when you're designing something. So the architectural side we have in the office is more about kind of looking at geometry, looking about kind of spatial layouts, that kind of stuff, rather than it being a fully architectural team. And I think one of the joys of what we do is that we are working with different architects all the time. So you can be working with one architect one day, one architect the next day, and there are different architects that specialize in different things. So it's just a really nice way to keep things fresh.
And you can obviously, depending on the type of project you're working on, you can put the team in that best suits that in terms of their specialism.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other thing is that, again, being a small team, we know that we're not experts in everything. So we have a series of consultants, collaborators, a huge network of people that we talk to about our projects. So whether it's wind advice, specific geotechnical advice, sometimes mechanical advice, if we're doing a staging structure, for example, we have people that we team up with, and they're not part of our full-time team. We wouldn't be able to keep them kind of occupied all the time, but we do have this brilliant network of collaborators who always like our call because we always ask them interesting questions.
The types of projects that you are delivering, you're looking at large civic buildings to art installations. There seems to be a real sort of variety in what you're doing. And how do you adapt your engineering mindset when moving between such different scales and styles?
I think you've always got to know what the priorities are on a project. So with an art project, it's got to be not pristine, but the detail is extremely important. With a building project, yes, the detail is important, but it's working out where the interest is, where some stuff will be covered up, and so it's about making it efficient and making it simple to build. Other stuff is architecturally exposed, and because of the kind of projects we do, we quite often end up with architecturally exposed steelwork, for example. But I think it's just at the beginning of the project, working out what the priorities are, and deciding what the focus is for a particular project. But like I said at the beginning, I think it's not a complete change of mindset. You can apply the same skills to a mega roof as you apply to a kind of medium scale art installation or even a small scale art installation. We're actually working on a new form of piano at the moment as part of an Innovate UK grant. And it's the same principles. It's the same idea of how do forces work, how do they flow, where do you need the stiffness. Those kind of ideas are common across all of the scales of project.
You mentioned there, obviously working in UK, we've already mentioned the project, the Chadstone shopping centre in Melbourne. You guys are doing work in the Middle East, States, you're spanning the globe. How do you manage the different sort of building regulations and various different regulations that apply to your industry from country to country?
It's about finding local partners. So I think the thing that we're good at is knowing who to ask and when. But for example, when we're working over in the States, unfortunately, to register as a licensed engineer over there, you have to have worked for 5 years in each state. So there's no way we're going to be able to license in the US anytime soon. But we would work with a locally registered engineer, and we would make sure that we have the conversations in the beginning about which design codes are relevant, what criteria are particularly important in a particular region. And then once that basis of design is agreed, we can go off and do the design, and then we can come back and make sure that they approve it at the end, ready to be kind of submitted to the authorities. And similarly, when we're working out in Australia, we were working with a locally registered engineer as part of the base build team. Similar when we worked in Dubai. So it's all about finding the right kind of local partner to team up with, basically.
How do you go about building out that network? I mean, we use, as a business, we use partners, we collaborate with certain people depending on the project. If we maybe need to bring someone in for something, we have our network within the UK. But there's having a network within the UK, and then there's having a network, globally. How do you go about building that? Because this isn't something that, how do I explain this? This isn't something that, if it goes wrong, it's okay, we'll just use someone else next time. This is important stuff. So you have to be able to trust these people, and inevitably there will be a time when you're using these people for the first time, right? So how do you go about, I suppose, vetting everyone? Well, firstly, connecting, vetting, and then finally engaging with these people?
I think we rely a lot on recommendations and speaking to other people who've worked in the region, and then looking at the work that they've done previously, and also just having kind of initial conversations. You can fairly quickly pick up whether somebody's coming from the same place as you are. I think it's a combination of that, really. But I think the most important thing is kind of finding people that have done similar work before and that you can find recommendations for.
I just want to pick up on a point that you said there, Chris, if I may, and this is going to be me banging the drum for my business, so you just have to forgive me.
Go on then.
But you mentioned there about looking at the work they've done previously, and being a growth partner for businesses within the built environment. Marketing is a large part of what we do. So to our listeners out there who perhaps may doubt whether marketing and portfolios are worth it, you've heard it here from Chris that they are worth it.
Yeah, absolutely.
If we could look at Chadstone in particular, because this is a project that we've spoken about, and it's one that I really want to sort of drill down on, because this is something that you've delivered over in Melbourne. And for any of our listeners that are listening to this that don't know Chadstone Shopping Centre, not that you would, it's over in Melbourne. It's a fantastic structure it's a very ambitious structure with a glass roof. What were the biggest engineering challenges in delivering that project?
Okay, so I mentioned that it's really important to understand the criteria at the beginning of each project. So on this one, we were trying to cover the main forecourt of an extension to the shopping centre in glass, effectively. So what are we looking at? We're looking at the cost, trying to keep the steelwork down, trying to look at the thermal performance of the envelope. And one thing we realised fairly early on was that actually, if you look at glass, it's priced by the bounding square of the panel size. So if you're building a structure that has a whole load of triangles in it, you actually end up paying twice the price because you're paying for the square that the triangle would have fitted into. So on that project, we decided fairly early on that actually what we wanted to do was to build a quadrilateral mesh, so have all of the panels square or rectangular or as close to square as they could be. But what that meant is if you imagine that you've got 3 points, you can draw a triangle and it can be flat on those 3 points. Now, if you have a fourth point on this kind of sweeping double curved surface, then actually that fourth point ends up being out of plane, and you can't guarantee that a single flat surface can meet all 4 points. And so what we ended up doing across that entire surface was working out a way that we could optimize this shell surface so that all of the glazing panels were effectively flat. And so we wrote the script that did that, and that was what governed a lot of the design. And so it's kind of right at the beginning of the project, it's working out what is critical. So in this case, it was, how is glass costed? Okay, great. What is the criteria that we need to meet to make this glass work? So the amount of kind of out of plane that we could have on a glass surface was actually defined by the manufacturer's warranty. And so it was right at the beginning, working out the kind of key parameters for the project, working out what actually was important, and then that shaped our approach to the rest of the project.
Why glass, Chris? The reason I ask that is, having seen it, and we discussed this before we hit record, it's a huge project. I mean, it's so impressive. And I imagine the shape of the structure and the way it's being put together. Glass was probably one of the most difficult materials you could use to build it with. Why glass?
People want the light, basically. They want to be able to see the sky, and it brings an absolutely beautiful finish. So if you want a kind of bright, airy atrium space, I mean, people have started using ETFE, but it doesn't give you that same feel. And so there is still a demand for glass, basically. So yeah, in certainly most high-end shopping centres, that's the kind of ambience that they want.
And how do you manage heat? Obviously, Melbourne, Australia, hot part of the world, lots of sunlight. How do you manage the potential issues that sunlight and heat could cause with a structure like that?
Again, it's one of the criteria that you have to establish nice and early on. So there are two things. First of all, you don't want the occupants of the shopping centre to get too hot. And so for this case, we actually used fritting. So you print a surface on the top of the glass and it reflects back a certain proportion of the light. And I think we ended up fritting so that only about 30% of the light actually comes into the shopping centre itself. So that was a key criteria. And then you've got to design all the steel to allow for the thermal difference. So if you imagine that the sun is shining on one side of the steel and not the other side of the steel, so all the steel had to be designed for that differential. And actually, what we realized again quite quickly when we were looking at it was that the thermal expansion you get as the steel heats up and cools down actually became quite dominant. And if you had everything rigidly fixed down to the base building, the building below, then you would have got huge forces just because of this thermal expansion and contraction. So the entire roof is actually on sliders. The roof can expand and contract by about 10 centimeters, 5 centimeters. So it's not a huge amount, but if you were to lock that up, then the forces get very large very quickly. And so, yeah, for this case, we had a whole system of sliding bearings that kind of released that thermal force.
I can imagine. I mean, thermal expansion must have been such an issue or potential issue for you guys to contend with. And it's like, okay, how do we allow for that in a structure that one is made of glass and two is huge? So it's impressive.
Fundamental, absolutely.
Absolutely. And what does a budget for a project like that, what does it look like? How do you go about, one, establishing it, and two, managing it throughout the course of the project to deliver it?
I think it's about kind of speaking to the right people early on. So as we were developing the roof, we were speaking to a number of different grid shell roof manufacturers. So we got their input. We got a feel for what the costs were going to come out as, but we also talked to them about how we could adjust the roof to make sure that it was as cost effective as possible. So things like getting the glass panel size right. We were talking to them about the maximum panel size we could have for the glass manufacturer, but also for fritting. How large a piece you could move in one go. So those kind of questions, if you have those conversations early on, it's great. But then, yeah, I mean, it's kind of early supplier engagement, basically. It's speaking to the right people at the right time.
And do you, the sort of service you offer, obviously you're coming in and you're delivering a huge part of the project, and the project cannot get started until you guys have gone in and done your calculations, etc. But do you, as a business, do you offer sort of cradle to grave, as in, you know, you're there from day one and you manage the whole project throughout, or do you come in and do your bit and then pass over?
I mean, it's different from different projects. So I think the key thing is that we really like to get involved in the concept design phase. That's when we can have the most impact, when a small change at concept design can make a fundamental difference to the overall cost, the overall sustainability of a project. So we love to get involved at that stage. And then some projects we hand over towards the later stages. So some of the international projects, a local partner is better placed to do the final design and the delivery on site. There are some projects where we're involved all the way through. So something like the ABBA Arena in East London, we were involved right from the very first concept discussions of what shape does this building need to take, all the way through to opening night, basically.
And you mentioned there about sort of concept and the initial stages of a project. Which region would you say is the easiest to deal with from, say, perhaps a planning perspective? I mean, the issues that we have in this country with planning approval are, you know, we all know the issues that we have. Is there a particular region that you find easier to work in, and which is the worst?
I mean, it's tricky. It's all different. Like there is a very established system over here, and I've been involved in some absolutely brilliant schemes that didn't manage to get planning permission. And that's always hugely disappointing, because you do have to put in really quite a lot of work to get it to a point where you can justify the planning submission. One of my favourites was a scheme for Brentford with an architect called Will Alsop. And the idea was to build 3 blob-like towers. Like they were absolutely fantastic. They looked like something landing from space. They were on spikes. Nothing you've ever seen. There were no straight surfaces in any of the buildings. It was fantastic. And it would have been an absolutely beautiful thing to deliver. So we had all of this worked out entirely. We had kind of justified how all the buildings could work, sequences going through everything. But sadly, it then comes down to kind of local politics, what the kind of local steering groups need, things like that. So I think over here, that certainly for the bigger schemes, there is, because it's so much more developed, there is a lot of work done before you can get approval. Now, there are other countries where it's less controlled, and I think it's possible to kind of build more interesting structures. But I think the level of rigor that we would apply is still the same. Certainly, there's some absolutely beautiful structure, kind of canopy structures going up in places like Bali at the moment, which are really fun to work on, and yeah, beautiful. And I'm not sure, or it would be harder to get those through the regulations here. But it's something we're working on.
Atelier One often embraces new materials and techniques, and I know that you guys are, one of the initiatives that you're driving towards is the use of bamboo. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it all started about 10 years ago now, when our founding director, Neil Thomas, was invited to go and visit the Green School in Bali by the founder, John Hardy. And it's fair to say that until that moment, we hadn't really considered bamboo as a kind of structural material. We hadn't really seen the potential. And Neil was shown these amazing buildings and immediately he said, well, why aren't we using bamboo more? And he came back to the office, and obviously he had had this kind of amazing experience and seen all these structures we hadn't. So when he came into the office and said, we're going to start looking at bamboo, I've got to admit I was skeptical. And yeah, we started looking into the detail of it, and we started looking at the material properties and the amazing growth speed. So property-wise, we're looking at a material that's 2 or 3 times stronger than timber. So certainly we've, in fact, I've got a sample here. Here we go. This is UK grown bamboo,
Wow.
Barinda, grown by a chap called Michael Brisbane. This stuff we had tested at Coventry University, and it's 3 times stronger than standard construction timber, and it grows in 3 years rather than 30. So it's an amazing material, and there's all sorts of benefits. I mean, apart from anything else, because it's a grass, when you cut it, it grows back faster. Whereas with a forest, it's always that compromise that you harvest it, but then you're kind of delaying you're setting back the forest every time you harvest the trees. So it's been an amazing kind of voyage of discovery. And once we had spent kind of 2 or 3 years actually kind of looking at bamboo properly and understanding it, we then started getting involved in some design. And I think if your listeners are going to look at one particular project, I think the Green School Gymnasium, the Arc in Bali, is one definitely worth having a look at. And what was great about that was that the Institution of Structural Engineers awarded us the Supreme Award for Structural Engineering Excellence for that project, and acknowledged that bamboo had a part in mainstream construction, which was actually really quite exciting. We need more sustainable materials. We need to find alternatives to the kind of standard steel and concrete. And we believe that bamboo has a huge kind of role to play in that. So since then, we've built structures in Bali, Costa Rica, Mexico, India, the Philippines, the list goes on. Some really beautiful structures. But what's exciting now is there's an increasing momentum to build something in the UK. So the first structure built in the UK out of bamboo, it wasn't one we were involved in, but it's actually the primate house at the Wild Heart Animal Sanctuary on the Isle of Wight. They managed to get bamboo approved. I don't think they realized what a kind of milestone it was when they were doing it. But there is a structure there. It's a kind of geodesic dome with netting over. But what we're turning our attention to now is the idea of building the first house in the UK out of bamboo. So just to give you an idea of the context, for a 50 square meter house, 75 square meter house, it takes in a forest 1 hectare 4 years to grow that much timber that you would need. Whereas with a bamboo plantation, it would take 1 hectare 1 year. So you can grow the material you need 4 times faster in the same area. So we have this brilliant collaboration going on. Coventry Council are kind of our main partners. They're championing it. But then Coventry University have offered us a site. We have a housing association who are then going to, once the house has been in place for people to see it, it's going to move, and we're going to have somebody living in it to prove it for the long term. And it's going to be really exciting. So as part of this kind of push for UK bamboo, there's been this brilliant series of kind of summits called the Imagine Bamboo series. So the first one was in Birmingham in 2022. And as part of the first Imagine Bamboo Summit, we actually built an arch that was 14 meters across, 7 meters high, and it was able to support people swinging. It was all grown out of UK grown bamboo. It was built by volunteers over the course of 3 days. And since then, there have been this series of kind of summits, basically. So we've been to Liverpool, we've been to Stoke-on-Trent, we've been to Coventry. Now, the latest one is on October the 10th in Stoke-on-Trent. We're hoping to have MPs there. We've got all sorts of people from the industry. And we're hoping to discuss this first prototype house and how we can push that forward on that date.
Chris, I have a few questions. Firstly, I think it's fantastic, and the drive for sustainability and the innovation that takes, and how you guys are, Atelier One, you're pushing that is admirable. The first thing, I didn't realize that you could grow bamboo in the UK. I just didn't think we had the
Absolutely.
climate for it.
No, you can. I mean, it grows better. The larger diameter bamboos grow better in tropical countries, but you can definitely grow bamboo in the UK. So um, there's an entire circus troupe touring the UK at the moment called No Fit State Circus, and they have a show that's entirely built out of UK grown bamboo. And you can see them climbing up and down these towers and doing gymnastics and acrobatics all over. So yes, you definitely can. The bamboo from that was from a place called Howard Hillier Gardens, just near Winchester. But actually, as a result of all of these conversations we've been having, I've started growing my own bamboo in my mother-in-law's back garden. It's amazing actually. So my son and I go out with a tape measure and kind of measure it during the growing season. And so at peak growth this year, we had 13 centimeters of growth in one day.
Wow.
Absolutely amazing. And that was the first year after planting. So yeah, you most definitely can. And in fact, the best bamboo I've seen in the UK and Ireland, if you go to Dublin Zoo, there are 56 different species of bamboo growing there, and growing up to kind of 8 or 9 meters high. So not quite to the extent as the tropics or Asia, for example, but yes, you definitely can grow bamboo over here. And in fact, there's a group called Bamboo Logic who are now commercializing the growth of bamboo across Europe, and are looking to start in the UK as well.
That's amazing. In terms of, if you could just help me visualize what a home would look like that's made out of bamboo. Obviously, I appreciate the sort of standard British home, 3-bed semi or whatever. You have steel joists that are holding retaining walls or whatever, but the sort of internal structure would be timber. So and then you build around that. But are you proposing that obviously the structural integrity it comes from bamboo, but also the outside is made from bamboo as well? Like how does this all work and come together?
It's what we're developing at the moment. Certainly the primary structure. So where you would have a timber frame house, you can use either natural pole bamboo or engineered bamboo. So engineered bamboo is like plywood, but made out of strips of bamboo that have been cut. So yeah, the primary structure of the house can be made out of bamboo. Absolutely. That there are people developing that around the world, in Mexico, in Ecuador, for example. So that's happening. And there's a group called Base Baha'i doing it in the Philippines, and Casa Congo in Mexico. And yeah, lots more around the world. So that's quite well established. Now the challenge is bringing that to the UK climate. So it's how do you put a coat around it? How do you insulate it? How do you get the humidity right inside? Make sure all of that detailing works. And it's all solvable. It just needs to be worked through. I don't think you would want to make it look like a kind of tropical house at the moment. People know what they want their house to look like, and if you steer too far away from that, then they get alarmed. So I think in the early days we'd be trying to match the performance, the kind of layout, the kind of general feel of a standard UK house, but switching the main structural components to engineered bamboo or whole pole bamboo.
That's what I was aiming at, because the thought of just walking down a road and seeing a home that's made completely out of bamboo would be so just strange. And I think that there'd be
and I'd love it, but I think I'd be in the minority. So yeah.
I think, but to have the structural components, basically you're substituting the timber for bamboo, makes a lot of sense.
And you're using existing expertise, so it's not that much of a leap.
Well, that was going to be my next question, actually, Chris, is how, obviously we have centuries or whatever of building control and techniques that we use to build, the quintessential UK home. But by substituting timber for bamboo, does that change, the learning curve for our contractors? Does it mean they have to build in a different way?
It does. We find that people working with bamboo, if they've got the timber skill set, then it can be quite quickly learnt, but you do need to treat bamboo as a kind of slightly different material. So how you join it, how you span, all that kind of stuff, you do need to think about slightly differently. But the skill set from timber frame manufacturer, there's definitely a large overlap. I think that the challenge is, because it is a new material, to prove its durability, its fire performance, and kind of work through those kind of verifications, and then make sure that building control have the documentation they need to be able to say yes, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It's fantastic as well, and I love the innovation and the readiness to take a step that will be deemed and is quite unusual, but it actually does solve a problem. I think it's fantastic. In terms of the future, and sustainability is such a hot topic in our industry, and it's becoming central to structural design. I mean, you've just given us an example there. How do you see the role of structural engineers evolving as the industry pushes for net zero and more resource efficient buildings?
First of all, I'm delighted that there is this push. It's long overdue, and I hope it accelerates more and more. I think sustainable design is this kind of phrase that people use a lot, and actually kind of good design, sustainable design, they're intrinsically linked. So if I think about what I want to do to build a building sustainably, first of all, I would look at the project holistically. So when you're starting a project, you don't just kind of narrow down into the structure. You look at the project as a wider task. So things like, actually, where should this building be? What is the kind of local forms of proven technology? What materials are available? What's the climate? Those kind of questions. So thinking about it kind of holistically, and also in collaboration with other disciplines. So you don't want a structural solution that is isolated from the architecture, that's isolated from the MEP strategy, for example. It all has to be thought of as one. So that's the first point, and that's just good design. It's not kind of intrinsically something new because we're talking about sustainability now. Secondly, using the most appropriate materials. Again, it's good design. So is concrete the best material? Is steel the best material? Or can we use something like bamboo? Can we use straw bale, for example, for insulation? So again, it's just thinking about the problem. And then thirdly, it's using the materials as efficiently as possible. And I think that's something where a structural engineer can really lead, where we can have our biggest input. Looking at things like grid spacing, panel sizes, can we use the shape of the structure to use the materials as efficiently as possible? So yes, those three things do end up with a more sustainable solution, but they're things that we've been prioritizing for 30 years. It's not a kind of a new push. But as we move forward, I think we're hopefully entering a world of more simple design, where we're not doing things for the sake of it, but we're doing things because there's a really well-grounded reason, that we've thought through the options and we've found the best way of solving the problem. And I hope there's more and more of that. I hope that the days of building things because we can are gone, and actually people kind of take a step back and say, okay, what's the problem we're trying to solve with this building? What's the most simple, elegant, efficient way of doing it? And it's not a compromise. It's quite often that actually, if you address the problem in that way, you get a better solution for everybody. It's more cost effective, it's a nicer building to use, and it's sustainable. So I think that's a key thing to kind of to be aware of. I think there'll be more structural reuse, and that makes complete sense. Obviously, if there's components that have been used in the previous building and we can use them in a new building, that's great. I'm delighted to see the reuse collective, where structural engineers are teaming up to actually kind of start forming that network, because on one particular project, it's very unlikely that you're going to have a whole load of steel beams from a building that was already on the site that you can reuse directly. But as we start working collaboratively and expanding that network, the chances of kind of finding uses for waste from one site to go into another site become more and more. So yeah, I mean, simple design, trying to maximize reuse, working together to make sure that waste from one industry or one building, one demolition site can be used on another building. And then I'm hoping that people just remain open-minded. I remember starting at Atelier One, and above the door there was the quote, "All great thoughts and all great deeds start from a ridiculous beginning." And I think we have to make sure that we're not siloed, that we're not stuck in our ways, that we're open to new ideas. And I hope there's more of that. I hope that people will have fun trying to solve the problem, trying to think of new ideas, new solutions. So I hope that we don't end up in a kind of boring world of utilitarian structures, but actually we enter a kind of beautiful world where actually we're copying from nature, we're working together. Yeah, let's hope.
I think that's what you mentioned there about not being siloed and not being constrained by the norm. I think, the construction built environment industry has always been sort of beaten with a bit of a stick for being, traditional and behind the curve and, this, that, and the other. But I think and this is what this podcast is about fundamentally, surfacing the people within the industry that are pushing innovation and trying to find different ways of doing things. And, you guys over at Atelier One, just the bamboo initiative is just fantastic. And it's different, right? It's people are going to listen to this and go, really, bamboo? Come on. But this is what we're talking about. And to be able to push innovation and do things that are different and make the world a better place, you have to get outside of your comfort zone and try things that might seem ridiculous to start with. But, you shape them with the process and you end up with something that potentially could be a complete game changer for the industry that you'll look back on in 50 years and say, wow, this is the point where things changed. And I think it's fantastic what you're doing. And I wish you all the best with it. And I will be watching, definitely. Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And thank you so much for you sharing your insights and inspiration. It's been brilliant. Where can our listeners find you if they want to look you up?
So I think it starts off with the Atelier One website, www.atelierone.com.
Excellent. There we are. And I assume you guys, you're on socials, Instagram, LinkedIn?
Yeah, we're on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn. So you'll see regular updates there.
There you go, guys. To all our listeners, go and check these guys out. They are doing some fantastic work in the industry. And it's well worth a look. Chris, been a pleasure having you on. Thank you very much for your time, and no doubt we'll speak again soon.
Thank you very much.